children of anti-vaxxers who grew up and got yourselves vaccinated. What's your story? How did your parents take it? Serious. If someone handed me a copy of Vaxxed, I would literally crush it to pieces in front of their eyes and then say thanks. Stamping out ignorance is always satisfying. I had an idea they were anti-vaxxers, but it was never confirmed. They mentioned my younger brother wasn't, but it was justified because we were living in the mountains of Montana and it was too far a drive to the doctor. I assumed I had been, as I was born in civilization and we didn't move to the hills until I was 3. We were homeschooled. My older brother had trouble at college with his immunizations and mom said all the paperwork was lost when they moved. I was 30 years old and I was offered a job at a university helping train doctors. Started getting paperwork asking for proof of vaccinations. I just said test me and give me whatever I need. But I know I've had chickenpox. Turns out I had nothing. No antibodies and I'd never had chickenpox either. Mom said I had lit up both arms with a run of shots over the next 3 months. All paid for by Vanderbilt. Thank you, Vandy. Never forget telling my boyfriend and he yelled you've been to Mexico twice and Europe. Oh my god. Called my mom and said hey, I'm getting a job and they say I've never been vaccinated. Was I? She got very defensive and said no. She hated making us cry as babies and they're bad for little kids. Also, did I really need them? She then tried to talk me out of them. Since I know how they work, I felt very okay letting her know I'd already starting the process. And thank God for herd immunity. I'm so thankful for all of you protecting me until I found out. She hated making you cry as babies. Damn lucky you didn't end up brain damaged from chemical meningitis or the like. What a fucking excuse. Edit. Pardon me. Regular meningitis. So sorry I talked out of my asses. Hey, you can't cry if you're dead, CDN webpage. Vaccinations are very enforced in Mexico. The government doesn't mess around with vaccines in most areas. All kids have to be vaccinated to go to school. Mom got rubella when pregnant with me. As a result, I was born severely deaf, so there ya go. Life's not the best. Y'all don't be fucking stupid. Edit. Yes, my name here is very relevant, thanks guys LMAO. Interestingly, it seems as though you can lose your rubella immunity. I was immune during my first pregnancy, but then when tested for my second just 2 years later, I was no longer immune and advised to avoid people. Yes, I've heard of that happening. Either way, it really wasn't her fault. She was poor as the child doesn't remember if she ever got it or not. I feel unfortunate, Mayo, it's life. This is me. I've had 2 boosters in the last 3 years and my immunity is still low. No explanation. But this is why everyone else getting immunized and herd immunity is so important. Because not everyone can be. Doctors can't do neat things these days. 2. I had all my childhood shots except some missed boosters in middle school due to move. So, when I got pregnant in my 20s, the doctors decided to run blood tests on me to see if I had immunity to rubella. They checked for particular antibodies, I guess. As it turns out, I did. I don't think I could have gotten MMR at that point anyway. I don't think they give that one to pregnant women. But I could be wrong. Maybe they can. And maybe that's why they checked. Doctors on Reddit are welcome to chime in. But it was good for all of us to know that rubella wasn't something I'd have to worry about. Yet I don't think they give it to pregnant women either. My mom pretty much just had to deal with it and got better on her own. They figured I wouldn't make it or have a deformity, but when I was born I looked perfect till my mom discovered she had to yell at me from my left side only so I can hear her. At first she thought I was being difficult with the selective hearing some kids do, so I got in trouble a few times. Lol tbh, I don't blame my mom. Her parents probs didn't vaccinate her. She was poor, never went to high school, so she lacked the knowledge. She made sure I got all my vaccines as a kid, so I love her for that. I got measles as a 22-year-old in my first week of moving to London. I'd previously lived up north, and on my first day of working immediately after finishing uni, I began feeling lethargic. By the second day, I felt pretty bad but soldiered on. Third day, I began taking fairly effective painkillers for the remainder of the week. Saturday, attended a local fair. After taking my morning painkiller, had a bottle of beer with my dad and felt very strange afterward. Almost floaty, but in a kinda bad way. Decided to stop taking the painkillers. Woke up with a raging fever and intense coughing on the Sunday. Hobbled out of bed, feeling dizzy and horrible, and noticed in the mirror of the bathroom that I looked like an Oompa Loompa. Red splotchy rash all over. My stepmom had been feeling similar symptoms that week. She decided to call an ambulance, who checked both of our conditions, and turned out I had a raging 41C fever and low oxygen. They took me to A&E and I was given fluids via a drip. Later, my stepmom came in and was given the same treatment. The doctor on call said it'd probably be a general viral infection. At home, took the week off work and recovered. Stepmom took off 2 weeks. She went back to A&E a couple of days after. The doctor on duty immediately spotted that it was measles. Thing is, in England, if you get it, an organization called Public Health England has to be legally informed by your doctor, which informs your workplace about your illness. Cue an embarrassing email being sent by your new boss to everyone in your company, before you've even met most of your colleagues. Took a while to recover. In a week I felt well enough to be out and about. You're only infectious when you have the rash, and a little before and after. I still felt out of whack for several weeks. This happened in July, and I didn't feel quite fully recovered until October or so. Obviously, neither myself or my stepmom had been vaccinated with the MMR. My dad and sisters had had it as children. We immediately got both jabs, after we were told how painful mumps could be. Strongly recommend everyone gets the MMR vaccine. It's straightforward and time-honored. Measles is unpleasant, and can cause complications in adults. My intense coughing almost certainly caused some lung damage, and my hair just kind of fell out in the months following. Save yourselves. My graduation ceremony was a couple of weeks after this. My actual mum saw how ill measles had left me. She changed her mind on vaccinations. Shame it had to be that way, though. Edit. Measles has a 2-week incubation. Me and my stepmom got it from an obscure South Asian restaurant. Edit 2. Mum's reason for not vaccinating was the regular autism scare one. Along with the MMR, I also caught up with other vaccinations such as meningitis, ACWY, Hep B and HPV. Important not just for girls. TLDR. Didn't have the MMR jab. Got measles on first ever week of working in a new city. Didn't feel fully well for months afterward. My mother stopped getting me immunized when I was 5. My dad wanted us immunized, but since mom was against it, my little brother and sister never got theirs. I got completely caught up once I turned 19. Dad got remarried a few years ago and he and his new wife are apparently anti-vaxxers now and believe that my baby sister's issue with one of her pinky fingers was caused from something his wife got while pregnant, and the entire thing is just completely wackadoo. Vaccines don't mess up pinky fingers. I just don't get how that works lol. Hey, this is relevant to me. My parents chose not to vaccinate my sister and me. They have some unique ideas about science and medicine. We were also homeschooled, if that clarifies anything. We both wound up volunteering at hospitals at different points in our lives, so we had to get caught up anyway. For me it was at age 20, for an internship at a mental health facility. It was a little awkward explaining to the nurse why I had nothing on my record, but she was understanding overall. I did tell my parents, and I thought they would be really upset. They were for a little bit, but they also recognized that I'm an adult and it's my choice, even if they think it's a bad one. I think they were also more concerned about exposing me to anything when I was developing, versus now they figure my body can take whatever I put it through. My big concern now is what will happen when I get around to having children of my own in a few years. I think they'll see me as a bad mother if I get them vaccinated, so I'm anticipating some fireworks. The real war for me as a mother was getting my parents to vaccinate themselves. No baby time unless they got fluent DAP. They aren't even anti-vaxxers. My in-laws lean more crunchy anti-vaxxy, but they happily got the shots. My mom tried to lock horns with me while I was on bed rest and in very delicate condition. It took me telling her they wouldn't get to see baby for her to get the shots. As I posted further up, my mum went the other way and opted not to see the baby. I really don't get it. Edit. Yikes, so now my highest post is about my crazy mother. Thanks for all the, mostly, kind words. Wow. I can't imagine choosing to not get vaccinated over seeing my own grandchild. Honestly, as much as it sucks, it's probably for the best. Would rather have a living baby and living mom who you never see or speak to than a dead baby and a mom you want to kill for killing your baby. I don't see any reason it's their business when you vaccinate your own children. It's your choice. Do it and refuse to argue with them, even if that means pretending to agree with them. Personally, my mom knows I don't agree with her anti-vax stance and I'm simply not going to have the argument with her. If she tries to bring it up constantly or something, which I don't think she'll do, then I'll just have to stay away for a while. My parents were anti-vaxxers before it was cool, like in the 90s. Kinda that ex-hippie, alternative medicine crowd but still conservative somehow. Anyway, I got my EMT license a few years ago and they were like, hey, we see that you don't have these vaccinations on your record. I had totally forgotten that I didn't have these basic MMR type vaxes. I said load me up with everything you can. And now I'm a superhero. They weren't happy that I got them. But my mom also believed that red dye number 40 and cow's milk would give you cancer, so I could never have that growing up. She got cancer at 67 anyway. Oh, did I mention she's a smoker too? Yet I don't really give a shit what they think. That's what gets me. Also, my parents smoke, yet a vaccine is dangerous. I have a friend that does all sorts of fucking drugs on the weekends but told me my deodorant was gonna give me breast cancer. I am always baffled by people who do crazy amounts of drugs and drink and smoke but then get on social media spouting about how veganism will save humanity. Okay Jessica, but veganism isn't gonna fix the brain damage you have from doing meth and mart, so just leave me the fuck alone. I didn't receive any vaccinations through childhood due to my parents' beliefs. Once I got to college, I did my own research on them, learned the actual science behind them, and got all vaccinations in college. I then went to medical school, and yet they still don't believe me and my medical degree regarding vaccinations. Holidays can get awkward. You can't reason someone out of a position they didn't reason themselves into. Sadly, I was not vaccinated as a child because my mother thought vaccines were evil, unchristian, and other ridiculous things. This was in the early 80s before all the autism BS. But she had her own unique theories. I got myself vaccinated when I went to university. My mother was disappointed and wanted to write a letter to the school explaining her religious views on vaccines, as she had done for years to keep me exempt. But I decided to go with science. The most amusing part was going to doctors trying to get childhood vaccines as an adult. One doctor didn't even believe me. He actually laughed. "What do you mean you need an MMR?" The doctor who eventually got me sorted had to look up a schedule and sort of wing it because it is something she had never dealt with before. We had a good laugh, though DTaP is no joke. That shit fucking hurts. My mother was not happy but sort of conceded that getting vaccinated as an adult was less risky than as a baby or whatever. My TDA or booster gave me a golf ball size knot in my arm that took almost 3 weeks to fully go away. It was super sore, too, but I would 100% do it again. I ended up at an emergency doctor's appointment because the swelling prevented me from driving, and they suggested double doses of ibuprofen and hot compresses. I think I was fine within 48 hours. We had our first child at the very beginning of the year and had to tell my father that since he won't get vaccinated he won't be able to see his grandbaby until the baby gets their shots. Baby has had their first round of shots a few months ago and my father can now visit. It pained me to do that, and I know it pained him. But I was not putting my child at risk for his choice. This last weekend we visited my father. At the end of the visit he handed me Vaxxed. He knows our feelings on the matter. Preventable diseases should be prevented. Herd immunity protects those most at risk. Autism is not caused by vaccines, and vaccinations causes adults. It's just disrespectful. I know he thinks he's trying to protect his grandson from harm, but it's coming from the completely wrong direction, and no one can seem to change his opinion on the matter. Hey, one I can answer. My dad was the anti-vaxxer. My mom was mostly ambivalent. Neither my brother or I were vaccinated at birth, and I didn't get my shots until I turned 19. My brother had to get a tetanus shot once when he was 6. Due to an injury, it burned my dad up for a while. His reasoning was typical. He believed that the mercury in the vaccines would cause us to somehow develop autism. My parents were also pretty hippy-dippy compared to most baby boomers, so they were concerned about chemicals and all that as well. Jokes on them, though, because both my brother and I are Aspies regardless of being unvaccinated. It was always a pain in the ass whenever we had to do school-related paperwork or field trip stuff, because my parents would have to produce a letter stating that it was their religious right to keep us untainted by vaccination. We were never a religious family. I wasn't a super sickly child, with a few exceptions, but my younger brother suffered a lot. He got pneumonia when he was real little, like 3-4. They had to keep him in the hospital and I remember my dad taking care of me at home while my mom stayed in the room with my brother. About a year or two after that he got walking pneumonia, and again was hospitalized. He's also allergic to damn near everything, and has bad asthma now. He has epilepsy, and we both have chronic migraines. I never had anything seriously life-threatening in terms of illness, but there was a nearly year-long period where I had strep throat almost every other week. I should have had my tonsils out. They wanted to intubate me at one point but for whatever reason changed their minds. But my dad threw a fit about having any surgeries performed. I also developed shingles when I was 13, which my father initially treated as poison ivy and left mostly untreated until my mother intervened. I still have little to no feeling on swatches of the left side of my body from the blister scars. That sucked, I did. However, had to get my vaccinations when I turned 18 and enrolled in college. He was not pleased about that, and actually we didn't talk for almost a year because of my decision to get vaccinated. Eventually we worked things out, but it took a while. I'll be vaccinating any children I may have in the future, though. TLDR. Wasn't vaccinated until I chose to do so myself as a legal adult. BC parents were afraid of autism. My brother and I were sick a lot as a kid, with some really preventable and stupid illnesses. I plan on vaccinating any children I have. What did he think would happen if you got vaccinated? Double Asperger. Lol, you'd think. My brother was diagnosed pretty early on, around 6 or 7, and I was diagnosed in my late teens, plenty far after when we'd have gotten our shots. It's interesting that you bring up getting shingles so young because I got shingles at about the same age, 12. I was fully vaccinated except for chickenpox because I got a mild case of chickenpox really young and they deemed it unneeded. Having shingles was probably the worst illness I have experienced in my life at this point. It was so painful. The doctor thought it was poison oak too, but my mom disagreed and took me to the ER for a second opinion. I'm glad she did. I'm so sorry to hear that you didn't get any care for your case of shingles because there are ways to shorten the duration if you catch it quick enough. Also, the after effects of the virus can be super sucky, as you well know. Luckily there are shingles vaccine available now. When I was 19 I had to get some vaccines in order to start college and my mom was not helpful. First she tried to get me exempt from the vaccines and when that didn't work she sent me into the clinic, alone, with completely false outdated info. I was super embarrassed when the nurses looked at my notes and told me that none of it was correct. But luckily they helped me figure out what I needed and didn't shame me too much for not having a previous vaccination record. A couple years later I went back in to get the rest of the recommended vaccines. My sister had her first kid, and the first grandbaby, last year and our mom has been pushing her not to vaccinate. Fortunately, my sister has chosen to vaccinate. She still is trying to get us to watch a documentary about it to change our minds. Now all us kids just don't talk to our mom about vaccines because it always turns into an argument. Edit. For everyone asking, the documentary is called The Truth About Vaccines. I haven't watched it and I don't intend on wasting my time watching it, because even if I proved everything wrong my mom won't accept anything else as fact. All of us kids have argued with her about it and we all decided it's better to just not discuss it. Your mom would be friends with my mom. She sabotaged me getting into the college I wanted simply because they did not accept religious exemptions and she couldn't trick any doctors into signing a health exemption. I wanted to go do it myself but they were through accepting applications by then and I was desperate to go to some college so I found a different one. Edit. And she's been trying to get me and my husband to watch an anti-vaxxers documentary. Find out which anti-vax doc, watch it ahead of time, make detailed notes of possible counter-arguments, then watch the doc with your mom and point out all the flaws. Too much effort. If they responded to the logical presentation of facts they wouldn't be anti-vaxxers in the first place. Yep. They don't want to do right. They want to be right. And by extension not be wrong. How is no one curious what the anti-vaxxers documentary is called? That thing is a potential mine. I've never understood the obsessive compulsiveness of anti-vaxxers. The argument is literally pushing a car uphill with flat tires. You move a little but then easily roll back. There's a lot better causes to fight for than vaccinations, but hell, Let's go with vaccinations. At that point, it feels like there's a mental illness component because of how hard they need to prove their point. To me it's on par as using Jesus or the Bible as a reason excuse for anything. AV friend, you need to watch Vaxxed, it's such an eye-opener. Me. You mean that documentary by the guy that paid a bunch of kids for blood samples at his own kid's birthday party without parental consent in order to push his own variant of the MMR vaccine over the standard MMR? AV friend. Crickets. Wakefield is a hero. You're an ass. It's hilarious to me how much they want to believe Wakefield, but don't bother to check his background at all. Even then they claim it was all a big pharma smear campaign. The man got his license stripped over this bullshit and they still believe him. I mentioned it during a class presentation and pulled John Oliver's notice how I didn't say doctor. That's BC he's not one anymore joke. Got a nice couple laughs. From what I understand, this all started because an ambulance-chasing lawyer paid him to do it as part of trying to set up a class action suit against the medical companies that create the vaccines. Preventable diseases should be prevented. Herd immunity protects those most at risk. Autism is not caused by vaccines, and vaccinations causes adults. These are not feelings. They are facts. I really hate how anti-vaxxers are all. Do your research. Do your research, and yet they refuse to accept the absolute wealth of scientifically proven peer-reviewed research that shows that vaccines are not harmful to the general population and do not cause autism as fact. Yet celebrities with zero medical knowledge and mommy bloggers are somehow credible sources of information. One girl I know posted an article about how herd immunity is a lie. As someone with a degree in biology and a special interest in epidemiology, that hurt my heart. I bet you anything that documentary does not feature any qualified doctors. I have a feeling it actually might. Just not medical doctors, or in any kind of scientific field. I'll also guess that it won't stop them calling themselves doctors. My mum didn't get the measles vaccination because at the time she thought it caused autism. She was kinda one of the first anti-vaxxers. Wrote to papers about it everything. Anyway, a girl in our social group caught meningitis and died. Basically freakishly uncommon. After that, Mum was really scared the same thing could happen to me with any disease and basically begged me to get up to date with my shots. I guess the main takeaway is that when my mum was younger and inexperienced, she thought everything was a danger. She honestly thought she was doing best by me, I guess. Still has a bit of a problem trusting experts, though. If her reaction to the Charlagard case is anything to go by, I think it's important to recognize that parents aren't intentionally trying to hurt their kids. Well, most. I'm glad she decided to get you vaccinated after that though. It must have been terrifying. It's understandable that parents fear the thing they are more familiar with, that being autism today. However, 100 years ago they'd almost certainly have a family member or someone they know struck down by disease, and they'd have been begging for even a fraction of the protection that today's vaccines offer. Parents also today are so blinded by fear of autism that they don't really understand the difference between rise in autism versus rise in autism diagnosis. Autism isn't new. It's just better understood. Parents aren't intentionally trying to hurt their kids. Well, most. I agree. But I think a lot of the kind of valid hatred towards anti-vaxxers comes from their callous disregard for other children. They're not trying to hurt their kids. But then you get other parents with children who have awful immune diseases literally begging anti-vaxxers to help them protect their child, and they just don't care. I agree. They have a very self-focused stance not based on sound science. Often, the fear of screwing up their kids or feeling like a bad parent, leads to overdoing it. Even after therapy with her physically there for the meetings, my mom still won't recognize or own up to all the crap she put me through because she can't handle the idea that she could have harmed me. Funny how that intense desire not to hurt your kids can directly have the opposite effect. I would guess that most parents are deliberately vindictive toward their children. Parents that let their kids get sick and or die don't want that to happen. They're just irresponsible or mistrustful or uneducated or have horrible belief systems. There's no test you have to take to become a parent, and the young couple who believes in prayer doesn't typically want their child to die, but at some point there has to be some responsibility for criminal negligence. Just because you don't want to believe something doesn't make it any less true, especially when that thing costs the life of your child. Whether that's the refusal to vaccinate your kids or something else. Refusing vaccines is probably even worse because you're not only endangering your own children, you're also endangering other people as well. I'm autistic and it makes me so sad that people would rather risk these horrible deadly diseases than have their kid be autistic. It's really not that bad, guys. I have autism as well, and I agree. Despite the sensory hypersensitivity and stress of trying to read social cues, I'm happy to be alive and relatively healthy. No sarcasm here when I say I'm really happy my mom made sure I was vaccinated. Depends the level. I am high functioning, so for me definitely, but for someone on the other end of the spectrum it might be another story. I'm not sure this qualifies, but my parents didn't give us the whooping cough vaccine under the advisement of our pediatrician. I actually didn't know this until last year, so I went and got vaccinated on my mom's recommendation. She wrote my siblings and me the following email to bring it up. As a parent, you are bound to make many mistakes. For me, not having the advantage of younger siblings, the internet, or, initially many friends with babies, I think I learned parenting on the fly. At the time, there seemed to be a compelling reason not to include the pertussis, whooping cough, vaccine along with whatever else was the recommended protocol for infants under the age of 1 year. I think we had read that it was one vaccine too many to be included in the series, and our first pediatrician felt strongly that it might have harmful side effects. Gramps had told me that he remembered having whooping cough as a child, and although it was harrowing, he survived. Draw your own conclusions here. However, I would now hope that you all might consider following up with your doctors to see if you should be vaccinated now as adults. Out of guilt, I'd be willing to sweeten the deal by paying for whatever isn't covered by your healthcare. Tetanus shots, flu shots, etc. aren't a bad idea either, although you're on your own there. Also, I want to apologize to sister, and brother, for the time we went to the geneticist who took punch core samples of your skin for testing. We had no idea, and there's no excuse for our ignorance, that it would be a process painfully administered without anesthesia. I feel traumatized to this day, so I can't imagine how awful it was for you. I was reminded of those procedures recently when I heard Nobel Prize winning geneticist George Church tell his story on the moth. My life as a guinea pig. The moth web player web page. Action type equals add and play and story ID equals 12,800. I love you all dearly. So, I didn't get them on my own in contradiction to my parents' decisions, but at their request after they realized they had made a mistake. It was required for university. Thank God for that. Parents didn't really care. As soon as I turned 18 I got all of my vaccines up to date. My mother stopped after I was 7 or so. My dad didn't agree with her but respected her wishes. After I got them updated through my dad's health insurance, she was annoyed about it, but I eventually managed to explain herd immunity to her, and also found enough sources calling that out, the study that claimed vaccines cause autism, that she finally admitted she was incorrect, but still won't admit that vaccines aren't bad for you, saying that they have too much mercury in them. It's hard for people to admit they are wrong, so the fact that she did even a little is great. You should explain to her that H2O is made up of hydrogen, which is super explosive, and oxygen, which is super explosive. Better not put that stuff near fire. I've sent her the dihydrogen monoxide copy pasta before to quite hilarious results. She's the kind of person that seems to believe everything she reads on the internet. Wow. Thank you for sharing your story. I'm glad it didn't cause a massive rift in your family. Tell your mom that the only vaccine that contains mercury is the flu vaccine, and that it contains thimerosal. Thimerosal is readily excreted from the body and there has been no link to any adverse health responses to it. I'm glad your parents got you vaccinated anyways. Many parents with children who have autism decline to have their children vaccinated anyways. It's an interesting phenomenon. Source: Time web page. My mother was an anti-vaxxer for many years. She didn't have me vaccinated unless I could not get out of it for school. She used herbal remedies to treat teeth issues, and I do not blame her for doing what she did. She had 5 children. My father quit his job to start his own company, and for 10 years he didn't make a profit. She was doing everything she could to decrease medical bills and was concerned about the chemicals people were pumping into their body. It became an issue when my sister was 13 and she got a bad cough. It got worse and worse despite my mother using herbs and taking her to a holistic doctor. My sister was on about 30 different herbs and getting worse. One night, she had such a bad attack that she couldn't breathe and her barking cough woke up the entire house. She was sick with pertussis, an infection that is vaccinated against in kids and has been brought to near extinction in the United States due to vaccination, but has been making a comeback due to anti-vaxxers. My sister, the one who had pertussis aka whooping cough, followed in my mother's footsteps due to ignorance, and I joined the military. In the military, you get vaccinated for everything. I have been vaccinated for polio, anthrax, rabies, tetanus, diphtheria, pertussis, yellow fever, Japanese encephalitis, and many more with no side effects. I began working in the medical field and went to school at George Washington School of Medicine while I was deployed. Then, my wife got pregnant. I had the resources to find and understand the scientific answer to the question anti-vaxxers ask: do vaccines cause autism and health issues? Short answer: number. I saw people who weren't vaccinated dying of diseases we had nearly wiped from existence through vaccination. I saw ignorance cause health issues when simple treatment was turned away due to religious or personal belief. So I told my mom and sister that we were going to vaccinate my son. The issue being that TDAP, the tetanus, diphtheria and pertussis vaccine can't be given to a child until he is 3-6 months old. I told them if they wanted to meet his son, they would have to get vaccinated. My mother conceded because there wasn't going to be anything keeping her from meeting her first grandchild. My sister told me she wasn't sacrificing her beliefs for me, and I told her, that's fine. I'm not letting you near my son until he is vaccinated then. Why? Because his death is not worth your pride. She folded a month before he was born. Now the rest of my family has slowly been getting vaccinated for other stuff and looking to me for medical advice. I tell them that I love them and want the best for them, and show them peer-reviewed scientific articles on proof against their beliefs. They are slowly switching to my side. My parents were very against it. Never particularly vocal about it, but growing up, my schools would organize mass vaccinations for all the kids, MMR etc. And I was always mysteriously off sick those days. My school never noticed and I was always pretty happy as I have a terrible phobia of needles and never really understood the health implications. I've never had any health problems, but I've had partners weirded out by it. I was dating one guy who didn't want to go near me once he found out I hadn't had any vaccinations. That felt odd. Last year there was a measles outbreak at my university and I was very nervous about it. Called my parents for advice and their response? Go get the vaccine. Classic. I'm guessing their opinions have changed over the years, but they are too proud to say outright that maybe they were wrong and their children's health could now be at risk. About time I got the rest of them done. Boyfriend. Not gonna lie, I'd be hesitant to sleep with someone who didn't have the HPV vaccines. Also, I don't think I could afford to miss a day of work or school, especially near finals. At least for the preventable diseases. That wasn't available when I was a kid. You ageist. But seriously, I wish it had been. Worry not. Gardasil doesn't protect against most of HOV strains. Just the ones that are most likely to lead to cancer. Not wanting to date someone who could have gotten the vaccine, while a valid point, is not necessary. Guy who's gotten the HPV vaccine in his early 20s. Edit. Kind of got tired of the "you're a bad person for trying to protect your parents" messages. I'm still a minor and confused. None of that felt helpful. I got my own shots and I did what I could. And it's hard to ask for advice because of bad reactions I get to it. I appreciate every message that tried to help me or offered me spare inhalers, etc. But I don't feel comfortable sharing this story. Godspeed. I'm not accusing your parents of neglect. Boo it. The whole not being able to travel with an inhaler thing really rubs me the wrong way. That's willfully putting your child in harm's way. Yes. I was not allowed to carry an inhaler because it wasn't ladylike or something. I was terrified of having an attack because when I did, it was my fault and it would make it harder for me to get married. I felt like crying when I became an adult and got to have an inhaler of my very own that I could carry. Sucks to realize that my parents cared about me getting married more than they cared about being alive. That is so fucked up, and I cannot even imagine how anxious you must have been not being able to carry one. Anyways, I am glad nothing happened to you and I hope that I do not offend you because they are still your parents and all, but I don't think people like that shall be allowed to keep the custody of their children because they are clearly not capable of taking care of another human being. I don't think they should have been allowed to keep their children either. I think they have messed up values. My anxiety just went through the roof reading this. I've had an asthma attack when I didn't have an inhaler around and I've never felt fear like I did then. I honestly thought I was going to die. I can't imagine not being allowed an inhaler by my own parents. Oh my goodness. For the majority of our childhood, my brothers were able and willing to share theirs with me. And for the rest, you get used to the fear. It sucks, but it is like background radiation. Also, I have had 2 asthma attacks in the past 5 years. I cried after I got treatment because I was allowed to have it. I could just use the inhaler. My mom refused to have me assist for asthma, even after I got pneumonia and a doctor told her I needed to be checked out, because she smoked in the house and thought that the doctor was blaming her for me having respiratory issues. I got an inhaler in my mid-30s when I got insurance through my work for the first time, and just about cried in the car from relief. Why yes, my mother does have a diagnosed personality disorder. Polly, my dad used to get so mad at my brothers and I when we would all come down sick after visiting his mom and staying in her house for days. We all had asthma, but no, it was totally my mom trying to alienate us from his mom and make us hate her, not forcing his 3 asthmatic children to stay in this woman's house for days, when she'd smoke 2 packs a day. Nah, we were totally faking it. If you're in the UK, you can make an appointment with your GP, which is kept completely confidential from your parents, and discuss with the GP whether or not they can vaccinate you without your parents' consent. I would be very surprised if they refuse to do it. This is aimed at your parents, not you. That's the stupidest fucking thing I've ever heard. I have 2 daughters with asthma and I would much prefer that they be able to breathe, even if it means they stay single for the rest of their lives. Which is, of course, fucking ridiculous. Women with asthma get married all the time. Where the fuck did they get that idea? I can't fucking stand people who are always worrying about marrying their daughters off. I don't care if my daughters never get married, as long as they're happy. I'm glad you survived until adulthood. It must be liberating to be able to have an inhaler. Their thinking was that it would mark me as defective and that would make it harder for me to get married since I would be worth less and come into the marriage already costing more money than a non-asthmatic. I mean, they did find someone, but like, maybe they should have considered that they could have lied or that having me not survive would cost them more than an inhaler. That's what crossed the line for me in this story. There's no reason to deny someone a perfectly harmless thing that millions of people use and is guaranteed to make their life better. I'd personally recommend getting CPS involved at that point. That could be potentially life-threatening levels of neglect if she is denied her inhaler and ends up needing it in a crisis. Absolutely. Moms needs to be relieved of some of her duties. Better to step in now than end up with a dead girl and a convicted mother, because she would absolutely be convicted, sentenced and jailed. Canada charged parents for that same kind of situation a couple years ago and upheld it last year. Anti-Vaxxers who also denied their critically ill 19-month-old child access to modern medicine, resulting in his death. So now the precedent has been set in our country, and hopefully, that will help to stem the tide on this bizarre modern day denial of science and medicine. That's where I would call CPS for a house visit. Hopefully that would scare them into letting their kids at least take the critical stuff, like the asthma inhaler. That can straight up get you killed. Not to mention if they have an attack either wrong place, they can go to jail. I'm an asthmatic. Your sister could die if she had a bad enough attack. It's very painful and terrifying to not be able to breathe. Whether you want to get them in trouble or not, your parents are putting your sister's life at risk, and subjecting her to a great deal of physical pain and discomfort. Please say something. I'm also an asthmatic and got tears in my eyes thinking about a child not having access to their inhaler. Even if I'm not having an attack, maybe just having some minor irritation, it still hurts to breathe. What if she walked through a cloud of smoke or some other major irritant and had a sudden attack? I get panicky if I don't have it when I leave my office to go across campus, much less go about my whole day without it. I hope she lets an adult know. Your sister should absolutely carry an inhaler if she's asthmatic. When I was a kid, one of cousins died from an asthmatic episode. I don't know all of the details, but it pisses me off when people don't take asthma seriously. Seriously, asthma runs in my family, and the only reason the people who have it are getting to life to a nice old age is because they have their inhalers on them at all times. Asthma kills. It's not a joke. Your sister needs an inhaler. Would you rather her die from an asthma attack, or give your parents a well-needed scare from authorities? OP is a teenager who only recently started taking steps to protect their own health without parental consent. I agree with you, the situation is unacceptable, but I don't think it's fair to put Sis's life on ARP's shoulders by calling the authorities. OP could put him herself at risk. It's not even certain CPS would do anything. Not trying to be defeatist, just trying to look at the situation realistically. Make sure you are safe before you help someone else applies strongly here. Good on you for getting your shots. Hopefully your sisters will stay healthy until they are old enough to get the shots on their own or can find a way like you did. Please get your sister an inhaler. You can try asking the same health professionals you saw for your shots about getting one. As an asthmatic myself, I know it can literally be a matter of life or death if you don't have one when you need it. I understand that you don't want to get your parents in trouble, but your sister needs access to medication. It's more important to focus on her health than your parents' feelings. Here are 2 ideas for your sister. 1. Call CPS yourself. 2. Have her tell a teacher she has asthma and is scared she will have an attack without it and have a teacher call CPS. Your sister could die if she had a bad attack without her inhaler. Doctor here. In the long run, untreated asthma becomes irreversible. Your airways suffer structural changes, and even if you start treatment, then you can't fully go back. This happened to me. Not getting proper treatment early on has made breathing difficulties a massive part of my life. I don't think you should care about putting your parents in bad light or trouble. They more than deserve that, because they put their ridiculous beliefs before the health of their children. I understand that you want to protect them. Still, it's time for you to be reasonable and put your sister's health before the reputation of your parents. I am assuming you are from states, so I am not 100% confident about how you should go on from here. Maybe talk to a social worker or find more info online about similar situations. Reddit is a great place for that. I don't think what your parents are doing is anything short of abuse, no matter how right they think they are. Inhaler will improve the quality of your sister's life, and that's what is important. I'm sorry to say something so negative about your parents, but you should report them for neglect. Your sister's inhaler might be needed in an emergency, and there could be tragic outcomes. I'd call Child Protective Services and give an anonymous report, saying that you believe the children are being denied adequate and necessary medical care. If your siblings are old enough to speak, the county will talk to them and find out the truth. Regardless of whatever lies your parents tell, it is a neglect issue, and if they have a social worker assigned to them, your parents would be investigated. Good luck. Naturopathic doctor. This really explains it. Also, fuck your parents for not letting your sister carry an inhaler. I had asthma when I was younger, and an inhaler kept me alive a few times. It's literally a matter of life and death, along with other diseases you get vaccinated for. Sorry if I'm an asshole. This kinda shit pisses me off. The neglect is strong here. I almost died in high school from my asthma, running track while it was smoky outside and realizing I lost my inhaler after I started having an asthma attack. My school had to get a medical chopper flown out because we were 30 minutes away from any city hospital. CPS isn't likely to split up your family for something like this, and your parents won't get in any serious trouble if you call them. CPS will just monitor the situation to make sure your sister is getting the care she needs. However, if you don't call CPS and your sister dies from an asthma attack, your parents will probably go to jail for causing her death. Please, please, please get help for your sister. But I don't have anyone I can talk to about it and would rather not get my parents in trouble for neglect. That's their fault. Their job as parents is to care for and protect their children from poverty, illness, and abuse. By not vaccinating them, they fail at all 2 out of those 3 things. I understand you love your parents, but don't gamble with your siblings' lives like that. If they are this stubborn, then they won't shift their viewpoint. My parents used to not vaccinate me or any of my 4 siblings, but when I was like 3 years old, me and my siblings all came down with whooping cough. It scarred my lungs and I have yellow stains on my teeth because the high fevers cooked my adult teeth inside my head. My parents vaccinated us after that. Edit. I am not and have never been mad or spiteful to my parents for not vaccinating me. I don't really consider them anti-vaxxers. My parents were very young when they had me and they were also very impoverished. They were real big hippies and believed that anything I needed, including immunity, God would provide. Me and all of my siblings were raised really well and my parents have always been very loving. They were just naive, and doing what they thought was best for me and my siblings. Jesus Christ. 5 kids with whooping cough. That must have been a nightmare for your parents. Edit. If you're here to tell me something along the lines of if only there was a way to prevent whooping cough and the parents are dumb, please refer to the 10+ people before you in this very thread who have done the exact same thing. Yeah, not only that, but it came back almost every year until I was in like middle school. I'm so sorry to hear about what you went through. Personally, I still have not encountered a patient during rotation with whooping cough, but I've studied enough books to know they are terrible. How are you right now? It's on the rise. You're certain to encounter it eventually, mostly among babies, children of anti-vaxxers or those exposed to the kids of anti-vaxxers. It's on the rise specifically because of anti-vaxxers. Let's make that real clear. If you are anti-vaxxers, this is why you suck. The return of simple diseases is completely on you guys. My daughter made everybody in the family get whooping cough vaccines at least 2 months before the baby was born. I was happy to do it. A nightmare of their own creation. What people don't understand about vaccination is it isn't just there to protect the vaccinated. It protects the herd. Herd immunity. The people who can't be vaccinated for whatever reason. This is part of the reason being vaccinated, if you're able to, is so important. You're not only protecting yourself, you're protecting those around you whose immune systems aren't up to it and could be hugely negatively impacted by their fellow neighbors refusing for their own uneducated reasons. Yikes. I didn't even know that could happen. My sister and I got German measles at the same time, not something people vaccinate against, and it changed one of her adult teeth into a strange color. We call it her cornflake tooth. Edit. Apparently we were vaccinated. Till. German measles is also known as rubella. Yes, it is. German measles is rubella, which is the R in MMR. Measles, mumps, rubella. Can relate to the yellow teeth part. As a kid I was always sick and the ridiculous amount of med steroids I was on fucked me teeth up to a miserable yellow color. My parents never explicitly said they were anti-vaccine to me, but I was never vaccinated as a child. I actually caught measles, mumps and rubella on separate occasions. Luckily diagnosed quickly enough to not cause any major health implications long term, but still a pretty miserable experience each time. So yeah, thanks for that. I've since had the vaccines, despite in theory having an immune system that could handle them. Just like Mother Teresa was against anything more than just basic care, even denying those under her care pain medication because suffering brought you closer to God. Then when she was deathly ill, off on a private jet to be treated at the top hospitals in America. Nothing beats organized religion in hypocrisy, LMAO. I went to Catholic school, and for our December 2011 Mass our chaplain gave a homily about how Lady Gaga and Madonna were bad because they wore costumes and didn't show their true faces to the world or something. 2 weeks later he was arrested for molesting a kid in 2004. So somehow makeup and costumes are evil, but being a pedo isn't okay. My story sort of has a twist where if I hadn't gone against their wishes, I could be seriously ill or dead beyond the normal threat. My parents were against the MMR vaccination as my older brother was diagnosed with Asperger's shortly after he received it. I'm the youngest child and so never got the jab, even though mumps actually caused my mum to go half deaf as a teenager. It always made me uncomfortable knowing I wasn't protected, and I was in strong mind to do it eventually. But of course it's hard going against your parents' beliefs when they felt so strongly at what had happened to them. To me it felt like a form of denial of the autism in the family, which they see as much worse than it is. My brother is an amazing guy and they should give him more credit. Before you go to uni you have to get a meningitis jab. While I was at the doctor's, the doctor very much reminded me of Emma Thompson. Suggested giving me the MMR. I told her my parents were against it and she said she'd give it to me now and then in a few months I could tell them and prove that I was absolutely fine. So I did that. A few months after receiving the full vaccination, my flatmate and close friend got diagnosed with rubella. It spread all over her body, causing glandular and scarlet fever. She spent over a month in hospital and was in a fatal position. If I hadn't done it at that moment, I could have been in serious trouble. And rubella isn't common here at all. So if in doubt about going behind their backs, do it for yourself and your own safety, and that's the only excuse you need. My mom is against vaccines and I grew up in a very against vaccine school and was treated by homeopathic and holistic doctors. I used to believe all that shit. Then I started med school and changed my mind to vaccines aren't bad but they aren't necessary. Then I did a rotating at a pediatric hospital in the neurological area. That was a huge eye-opener. Meningitis is an awful disease and anti-vax never talk about it. The children I saw were the ones that survived and had brain damage afterwards. It was awful to see kids that could have had a perfectly normal life to end up like that. Then I started med school and changed my mind to vaccines aren't bad but they aren't necessary. I'm surprised your views didn't change earlier while considering being a doctor and such. But cheers to learning. A coworker's brother-in-law ended up brain dead from meningitis. He and his flatmates thought he had the flu in the morning. In the afternoon they found him unconscious. His life support was switched off after 2 weeks. I'm in my early-ish 20s and I have never had vaccines. However, I am very much for them. I'm actually embarrassed that I don't have them. My parents didn't vaccinate me as a child for a legitimate medical reason, so they say. But my brother was not vaccinated either. I am pretty sure I can get them now, regardless of if the medical situation is the truth or not. I'm on the search for a general doctor in my new state right now to ask questions and get vaccinated. I'm curious if there were any risks involved in getting vaccinated as an adult. The only thing to make sure of is that the reason you weren't vaccinated was because of an allergy. My husband's parents are pro-science, pro-vaccine. But because of his congenital condition and a very specific allergy, there was one vaccine he wasn't able to get, which is why herd immunity is so important. I wasn't fully vaccinated because of an allergy. As soon as I left the herd, a very small school and social group, I contracted whooping cough. First week of college. Had to quit and restart 2 semesters later. I know I'm making a cliché Reddit comment, but so much this. Anti-Vaxxers don't understand that they are not only risking their own children's health, but also all of those like your husband who cannot be vaccinated for legitimate medical reasons. We need herd immunity to protect our most vulnerable. Parents who refuse to vaccinate their little Braxton or Kaylee egg for bullshit reasons are endangering the lives of others. It's sickening. Pun totally intended. I had to get most of my vaccinations redone when I was around 20 years old for nursing school. I didn't have any of my childhood records and they drew titters and I was pretty much non-immune to everything, so I got a bunch. MMR, Tdap, Hep B, varicella, meningitis. I had no issues. Nope. You will probably want to take a nap that day, and the tetanus shot is likely to make your arm stiff for a couple of days. I just had the adult booster a couple of summers back. Good thing. Because guess who stepped on a rust attack this week? Tetanus only lasts for 10 years, so it needs more than one adult booster. Current guidelines say to get them every 10 years, but if you have an incident between years 5 and 10 to get it following that incident. When the HPV vaccine came out, there was a bunch of stories on the news about girls having poor reactions to it, getting seizures, comas, most of it nonsense. But my mother saw the news stories and chose not to get me vaccinated. But then, right after college, I had a brief bout of thyroid cancer, and decided I would take every precaution I could to not get more cancer, so I got the shots. I think at the time I didn't tell my mom, but afterward it came up. She was more huffy than anything else, and offended her thoughts at the time, but accepted my decision and reasoning. Also, there was the argument that it would make girls more promiscuous and it would encourage consequence-free sex. Utter nonsense. My mum is non-believer of vaccines. I am only 16. But I believe that scientists and doctors know what they are doing more than what my mum does. As of this moment I will vaccinate myself when I can. And my kids. Edit. I am able to get myself vaccinated at 16 without parental consent. At least I think I am. But what is stopping me is my relationship to my mum and her wishes for me to keep things natural. Because of this, I will do it when I have moved out and without my parents and I in the same household. Edit 2. I am from New Zealand. Why my spelling of mum is with a U? New Zealand has no problems with 16-year-olds visiting doctors by themselves. But I haven't looked into whether a parent would have to sign a statement saying whether they are okay with this or not. Edit 3. Thank you all for your advice on the issue. You have all been so supporting. If I could give gold to all of you without becoming poor, I would in a heartbeat. I was vaccinated when I was a baby as part of a mandatory vaccination program in the Soviet Union, but my parents wouldn't get boosters after we moved to the States. My family is pathologically distrustful of doctors and medication of any kind and prefers homeopathy and alternative medicines. I didn't realize I wasn't fully vaccinated until I went in for a physical in college. Up till then, I just assumed I'd been fully vaccinated in Russia, because that's what my parents told me. I got all my shots up to date and I just never mentioned it to my parents. Their anti-medicine stance has softened as they age, but I generally avoid the topic because I can't handle their bullshit and it never goes anywhere anyway. That said, I had a baby this past December in the middle of a really bad flu season and I told my parents that they weren't allowed to see the baby until they could produce proof of a flu shot. This is absolutely something they'd lie about. So yes, I demanded written proof. They both got one as soon as they realized I was serious. Edit. This blew up on me and I have to go parent for a bit. I'll respond to everyone as soon as possible. Edit 2. Thank you for the gold, kind stranger. So that's how that feels. Good for you for putting your foot down and protecting your baby. That's awesome. My mom told my grandpa he wasn't allowed to smoke cigarettes if he wanted to see me. He quit cold turkey the day I was born. It's something I never really thought about, but that was mentioned to me as a kid. Pretty incredible of him to do that after smoking since he was in college. I'm gonna go tell him I love him now. Edit. Thank you all for reassuring me that what he did is bigger than I ever realized. I sent him an email and will probably give him a call tomorrow. It's incredibly powerful to see that his quitting could very well be the reason he's still here today. Go tell someone you love them. He's miles ahead of a lot of parents I know. I was at my niece's birthday party and they just kept smoking. Kids around or not. I smoke like a chimney, but I just can't smoke around kids. It feels wrong. When I smoked I tried to avoid smoking near non-smokers as much as possible. I vape now but I feel it's just disrespectful to do it near non-smokers. Thank you for this. I notice the efforts when smokers do this, and I sincerely appreciate it. I just want to say thank you for your consideration. So many people vape but don't think about the scents that they are using. Some of those have me in a coughing fit just as bad as cigarettes do. Babies and grandparents. Seriously, even if you don't believe in flu shots or other vaccines, get them. If you are in college or work around other people, think of the immunocompromised. If you go home for the holidays, remember that schools, dorms, barracks, workspaces, etc. all can easily spread diseases, especially if you go through an airport to get home. It's easy to forget how much vaccines have changed our world, especially after nearly eradicating disfiguring diseases like polio and smallpox. Smallpox victim. For context, pinned webpage, NSFW-NSFL. Ugh, my work is literally the biggest cesspool ever. One person gets sick and next thing you know everyone's dropping like flies. NGMT gives you an incredibly hard time when you call out. You have to get your shift covered or you need to come in. Is it really that bad? You don't sound that sick. And I work in a restaurant. Who the fuck wants a sick person handling their food? Yeah, I've heard some awful stories from my roommate's previous job at a pizza place. One dude had a terrible vomiting bug, but was forced to come in and make pizzas. In between making pizzas, he'd go to the restroom to be profusely sick. WTF. Worked at a pizza restaurant for about 6 years. Same thing happened to me. Called my boss while sitting on the table in the examination room with the doctor to say I was too sick to come in. He told me I didn't have coverage and I needed to be there for my shift. The look of disgust on the doctor's face was something I'll always remember. The doctor couldn't just write an excuse saying no way in hell you could work. I didn't really have a way to say number. I worked for the man and rented an apartment, no lease, from him. If he fired me I would have lost everything. But all is good now. I quit shortly after that and it was the best decision I have ever made in my life in terms of progression. Yeah, person in a prime position to spread sickness to thousands of people, you have to come in. Person in middle management that probably sees 3 or 4 people a day, yeah, just call it flexi time, no worries, come in when you're better. Funny you mentioned barracks. Barracks sickness is a real thing. We're all vaccinated against most sickness, but if your body is still fighting multiple things at once, you're gonna feel like ass. Yeah, back when I was a freshman, there were 3 weeks when a massive sickness ripped through my university. Everyone was coughing around the school, to the point where I only noticed when people weren't coughing violently. Even my roommate had the plague. I didn't get it. By some miracle. 2 years ago during my senior year in college, there was a measles outbreak on campus. The damn measles, WTF, it's 2018. Edit. Yes, it was 2016. But either one is damn ridiculous. Vaccines save lives. Going through Kuwait at the beginning of deployments, I caught the Kuwaiti crowd every time. So many people staying in those tents for unknown amounts of time. Vaccinations can only go so far, but they help a lot in protecting against some of the worst. Their anti-medicine stance has softened as they age. Probably has something to do with deteriorating health and needing that medicine now that they're not in perfect young person health. Yup, the founder of Christian Science was very against traditional doctors, except for treating kidney stones. Totally had nothing to do with the fact that she herself suffered from kidney stones. Correction. She apparently used traditional medicine on herself to treat her stones, but then said she was testing which was more effective, prayer versus medicine. Man, that reminded me of my time in a Catholic high school. For context, this was 2015. A few times a year we'd have a priest come in and perform mass at the school. We also had a female chaplain who worked at the school full-time. So we saw her regularly. I read the morning announcements over the PA system and she would say a prayer. One day she says that the priest had passed away and she gave a very heartfelt prayer and said he'd passed away of cancer and that he'd be very missed, etc. Fast forward a couple months. All the students get a letter sent home with them essentially saying that the priest had worked somewhere else at an elementary school before and was accused of touching kids, and so he was sent here. It also said if anyone had had anything inappropriate done to them to step forward. Oh, also he committed suicide rather than dying of cancer. I grew up thinking that Catholic priests being child molesters was this thing that happened a few decades ago and all the jokes were some leftover thing. But nope, 2015 it still happens. He molested a kid, so they transferred him to another school. A+ for Catholicism. In our case, we had this school-wide assembly when we got back to school where the principal told us to not talk to reporters and we were completely banned from talking about it in class. Sucks because I had the coolest religion teacher that semester and the discussions would have been wild. Our priest was eventually found guilty of sexual exploitation, lied about his innocence and promised to appeal, and then hanged himself in his apartment right before I started uni. I remember my best friend texting me the news during Frosh and I was totally hammed and like, what? That's the exact sort of thing the police unions do. When an officer uses excessive force, or murders, they get fired and transferred to another department. This same outlook is what props up most of the institutions we have, where the damage caused by institutionalized practices is ignored, so that the institution can survive and not look bad. Profit before people. Good, you demanded proof. I had a co-worker who told their family to get vaccinations. In-laws said they got them. Didn't get them. Gave baby the flu. Co-worker was livid. Edit. Yes, I know the flu vaccine isn't 100% effective. When the in-laws passed on the flu, the co-worker asked for proof they received the vaccines and then the in-laws let it out that they didn't actually get the vaccines. Let it be known that didn't get them means didn't get them. And stop spamming my inbox with maybe they did get them and it wasn't effective. Because when you're telling a story, I hope someone interrupts you to say that's not what happened. This was exactly what I was afraid of. People just don't understand or don't care that the flu can actually kill a newborn. It's such an insane thing to risk. Just so you know. Flu, disease. Short for influenza. Flu, part of a chimney. I hope your co-worker never let those people see that baby again. Shit like that is evil. I am immunosuppressed due to transplant and my husband's side of the family are anti-vaxxers. I don't think they believe I'm serious about not attending family gatherings ever again. I know I can bump into a non-vaccinated person by just being out in public, but if I can avoid a known risk, I'm going to do it. Thank you everyone who's had their shots for helping keep me alive and healthy. I am severely allergic to the binder in the MMR, so I could never have it, and it always makes me so angry when people don't vaccinate. Like, thanks. I love going into quarantine for measles outbreaks. I literally cannot get this vaccine, but you're just an idiot. Good for you. I made both the wife's and my own family get DAP shots before they saw the kid out of hospital. Thought I was kidding until I said a softer version of fuck you. Kid comes first. I realize your question is directed at children of anti-vaxxers, and while I am technically not one, I am on the spectrum and did get my vaccinations as a child and just want to offer a slightly different perspective. First of all, my mother is an amazing and open-minded woman. I love her to bits and am extremely grateful to her for not being ignorant about health when I was a youngster. I'm now 31. So my vaccinations predated the whole vaccines cause autism craze. However, my mother felt extremely guilty for quite some time after that bogus study was published, as she, understandably, thought she had caused my autism through her own negligence. It wasn't something we initially talked about, as I was never personally convinced of the veracity of that study and thus didn't feel I had enough information to feel any animus towards her for it. I know now that she long wrestled with wanting to profusely apologize to me, but also was too ashamed to bring it up given that the damage was already done and I didn't seem to be holding it against her. I, on the other hand, did not want to bring it up either, because as I mentioned I wasn't convinced there was a connection and I didn't want to put the idea in her head that she should feel any guilt for it. Either way, after all, it hasn't stopped me from being an independent adult with a fulfilling life, as I am one of the lucky ones who can claim to be high functioning. And yes, I do think I'm lucky despite the challenges I have had throughout my life because of it. I know that it could be a lot worse. It wasn't until I was a young adult and my girlfriend at the time got pregnant that she finally did bring it up. It was certainly weird suddenly dealing with an anti-vaxxer parent, even if the real world implications of that stance were moot for me by that point in time. She was, however, very concerned that we would vaccinate the babe, and this is what prompted her to make her feelings on the subject known. It was also kind of funny being a young adult on the spectrum and having to convince my mom that her guilt was completely unfounded and that she in no way caused the disorder by getting me vaccinated. Hence, why I opened my comment by stating technically not an anti-vaxxer. She's not one anymore. BTW. But it did take some time and effort on my part to convince her that she'd not only done nothing wrong by getting me vaccinated, but that there was no danger of giving my child autism by vaccinating them at the appropriate time. I'd also like to point out that aside from the obvious potential for medical dangers to the individual and the larger community that can come from not vaccinating, this so-called anti-vaxxer movement also does a lot of emotional and psychological damage. Case in point, one of the things that my mom and I realized we had both experienced, albeit separately, was hostility towards her by others for having me vaccinated. We've both had to deal with our fair share of ignorant folks bashing her and accusing her of causing my autism. So please, if you've taken the time to read the responses on here and still somehow feel that your anti-vaxxer stance is not extremely flawed, don't denigrate and talk down to the parents who have vaccinated their offspring, especially in cases where said offspring also happen to have autism. Even if you believe that nonsense, You're only causing them unnecessary pain and anguish by trying to make them feel bad for being nothing less than good parents. Not to mention it can hurt the autistic person when you attack their parent like that. All of that being said, we do still worry that any children I may have in the future would be at risk of being born with the disorder. Just not because of vaccinations. Thank you to anyone who bothered to read my inadvertently lengthy comment, and a very sincere thank you to the OP for posting this very intriguing question. There are some really insightful comments on here, and it's always a huge plus and a step in the right direction if you can educate someone who's ignorant about this subject matter. My story is a bit complex. My mother is an avid anti-vaxxer, but didn't become that way until after my late sister died. She blamed the vaccines she got a few weeks before her death. She was 3 months old. For it, instead of the SIDS tragedy it was. My next youngest sibling was allergic to eggs, and so didn't get any vaccines until she was 8. After my parents were divorced and we had to move to a new state with new laws, my 2 youngest siblings have never been vaccinated against anything. Basically my mother was anti-vax. My dad let her handle that. So when she died when I was 9, no one in the family really cared that much. We just continued it as that was what we were used to. Continued to have the exempt forms in school, which I think claimed it was religious reasons, but it wasn't. Until I was 14/15. Then I was old enough to educate myself and was like, oh shit, I should do this, and convinced my dad, and bada boom, I had shots. The kicker, my brother didn't have shots but still has autism. So, take that, dead mother. My mum is a well-educated woman. Master level. So people are surprised when I tell them my mother never got me immunized. I think my mum never actually truly believed that vaccines were bad. I just think she easily falls for anything that is against mainstream, and being anti-vax ticked the box. She has always enjoyed going against the grain. For example, she doesn't believe in climate change and is very transphobic. But none of her arguments ever hold up when you question her about them. When my sister was 19 she got the mumps and ended up in hospital. At that point she got all of her immunizations up to date. When I decided I wanted to be a nurse I needed to get my immunizations up to date. It was very pricey as you had to pay if you missed the free immunization in high school. I wish she had just put our health before her hippie identify. Until this day when I ask her why she didn't immunize us she doesn't have an answer. So, what's your excuse for making herd immunity weaker? If it's not health related, i.e. you can't have vaccines due to allergies etc. Edit. Do you realize you can carry diseases without them having an effect on you? You and your siblings may be spreading diseases and harming people actively right now today. How do you justify not having your vaccinations knowing that? Would it sway you to know that you've given someone with a compromised immune system a disease that killed them? I've never gotten into a car accident but I have car insurance. Vaccines are just like insurance. Plus it helps those who can't be insured. This mirrors my experience almost exactly. Highly educated parents didn't immunize me after birth. I got vaccines so I could go into the healthcare profession. I changed course in my education. But I'm glad I got vaccinated. It didn't cost me anything to get caught up on vaccines. Thanks, Obama. I just had to go to the doctor a few times to get all the rounds. I feel kind of resentful with my parents for not vaccinating me. Anecdotally, I got sick frequently as a child. Never anything severe like mumps, but frequent colds, flu, strep throat, etc. I was also diagnosed with asthma, Doctors wanted to put tubes in my ears, etc. Edit for clarity. I got vaccinated 2 years ago. The following statements encompass a decade plus before being vaccinated. Now, I am in my mid-30s and haven't been ill even once in 12 years. My boyfriend had a terrible bout of the flu last year. High fever, loopy. Took him out for days. I took care of him and didn't really bother being hygienic in our home. Kissed him on the mouth. Cleaned his snot rags. Slept next to his sweaty body. I just got really clean to go to work. Then disinfected surfaces when his illness had passed. Never got sick. I certainly don't attribute my banging immune system to not having been vaccinated. Rather, I'd wager it's from my parents refusing to treat me with anything but herbs unless I was really sick, and handling filthy cash in food service jobs for over a decade. The government should study me or something. I'm glad I got vaccinated so as not to be a typhoid Mary of the new millennium. Hippie identity. Doesn't believe in climate change and is very transphobic. What? Out of curiosity, what is your mom's education in? I'm fascinated how an educated person could be anti-vax, a climate change denier, and also transphobic. Glad you're immunized now and are helping people. Nurses are wonderful and frankly the backbone of any hospital or medical facility. I've always been up to date on my vaccines. One thing that offends me about this topic though is the fact that some people still believe that vaccines cause autism. I have autism myself. Do you know how offending that is to hear? Sometimes on a daily basis when it was big in the news. Exactly. As an autistic person here as well, it hurts to know that so many parents think it's the worst possible thing that could happen to their child. I would think dying of measles ranks a bit higher on that scale. Yes, there are going to be certain challenges you'll have to work through when you have autism. Look at me. It's never been a walk in the park. Socially or mentally. Just like any other condition. But does that make it worse than being dead? Hell no. My daughter and I were just talking about this very thing in the car today, a few hours ago. In her words, it must be so offensive to autistic people that other people think autism is so bad they are willing to let their kid die of polio instead. Yup. Totally agree. I mean, is it so bad that you'd rather risk death? Finally a thread for me. My mom had a child who became brain damaged during birth due to a hole in the umbilical cord. She became convinced that there was some malpractice cover-up and gradually that all of medicine is one big conspiracy. I stopped getting vaccines around 10 due to a mysterious ailment I had that turned out to be recurrent benign positional paroxysmal vertigo. For some reason doctors couldn't figure it out and thought I had brain cancer. My mom became convinced it was vaccine related, and claimed she traced my vaccine and it was a bad batch that had killed a boy who got it. I stopped getting vaccines and turned in forms to school every year claiming personal objection exemption from all vaccines from that point on. I ended up deciding to become a biomedical scientist and enrolled in a PhD program. The Hep B vaccine was recommended for all students and I received the first course of the vaccine, and then mentioned it to my mom. She flipped the fuck out. She told me she couldn't believe I would do something so stupid, and that there were so many bad reactions I could have and they didn't all happen immediately. I started reading horror stories online about bad Hep B shot reactions, and I panicked. I really thought I may have done something really stupid. This was pretty ironic since I was in a science PhD program. But I was still making sense of what part of my childhood brainwashing was true and still coming to my own belief system. In my hesitation uncertainly, I failed to get the next dose of the Hep B shot in the required time window. I did intend to get it, but I forgot about it in the craziness of grad school. Fast forward to my 3rd year. I was studying liver cancer and working with a liver cancer cell line called Hep3b. I was reading the literature and stumbled on a paper that said that scientists had found that Hep3b cells are infected with live hepatitis B virus. That was really terrifying because I had been working with them for months and definitely had not taken the precautions you are supposed would take if you are working with active human pathogens. The fact that I passed up a free Hep shot and could have stupidly contracted Hep really crystallized the importance of vaccines for me that day. I didn't ever have obvious symptoms of Hep, but nonetheless I worried that I might have it up until I got pregnant with my daughter and tested negative during the prenatal tests. Needless to say, my daughter has gotten 100% of her vaccines and will continue to. I chose for her a pediatrician who refuses to see patients who don't get all of their vaccines on schedule. I don't even want to share a waiting room with unvaxxed kids. As for my mom, I don't talk to her anymore. That lady is batshit crazy. My mom got all my vaccinations when I was real little, but never took me in for my pre-middle school physical, and I was never real sure why. I have no idea why the school let me enroll without the physical shots having been done. When I moved in with my dad, I had to get caught up pretty quickly. I would go in, get 4 shots, which was the max, and then come back in a few weeks. I got everything I needed, and a few that I didn't need but my dad wanted me to have. My mom never seemed to have an opinion about it, just shrugged it off. She and him didn't communicate much, so they were always doing stuff without asking the other. One time while we were out of state, he took me to a clinic being held at a school to get a vaccination. Neither me nor my mother knew that this was planned. If you're under 26 and not vaccinated, pick up the phone and schedule yourself for a nurse's visit ASAP. In the US, childhood vaccines are well reimbursed until age 26. After that it becomes harder to have them covered. This includes Gardasil, the anti-HPV cervical cancer vaccine series. I'm turning 18 in 4 months. Probably gonna get vaccinated. Mother didn't want me vaccinated for God knows why, but I got my chickenpox vaccine last year to volunteer at a hospital. I want to major in biology and from what I understand, I'll need to be vaccinated for it. You should have been fully vaccinated to volunteer at a hospital. I'm surprised they allowed you through the doors. Please stop going to the hospital to volunteer if you aren't vaccinated. People there are already compromised. If you have anything they couldn't, probably would get it and could die. Hear that again. You may think you are helping, but they could die. Part of being in the medical science field is ethics, and it is not ethical to willingly go around sick people when you could accidentally kill them. Please, I've worked in a hospital. Nurses there weren't even allowed in rooms with babies, birthing, maternity, etc. if they had a simple cold sore because it could spread to the baby and potentially scar or kill them. I am 55 years old, and in reading these comments, I realized something. There were no anti-vaxxers when I was a kid. We all got vaccinated. In fact, we were the last group to get the smallpox vaccine. What is the point I am trying to make? That anti-vaxxers themselves were in all likelihood vaccinated as children, and then they grew up apparently healthy but paranoid about the process. How truly fascinating. I'm late to the conversation, but I'll post. When I was a child, I had a baby sibling who began exhibiting strange symptoms and died shortly after a round of immunizations. There was not a conclusive autopsy. It was called SIDS. Some of my family came to believe that it was the result of an immunization reaction and became anti-vaxxers. Now that I am grown and have my own child, I did vaccinate my child because I fully understand the massive public health benefits and the real risks of the diseases that immunizations protect us from. I will admit I was nervous when vaccinating my child, but I did it. Is it possible that some vaccines some of the time have had harmful side effects for a small number of people? Yes. Medical interventions and medications sometimes have side effects and occasionally very dangerous ones, and we need to acknowledge and understand them when they happen. But most of life is not black and white. While I will never know what killed my sibling, I have come to believe that the risks of not vaccinating are much greater. I am 31 and me and my siblings were never vaccinated. Reason: laser parenting. I never really thought about vaccinations until I got pregnant and was asked. Turns out I am immune to chickenpox and got rubella shot while pregnant. Both my kids are now vaccinated. I would hazard a guess that you got chickenpox long before the chickenpox vaccine was even available in the US in 1995. Having had the vaccine for your age group is far more unusual than not having had it. I hope you caught up on all your other vaccines too though, not just rubella. Being a parent of young children, you're more likely to be around exposed to groups with lower herd immunity, and measles and whooping cough and everything else seriously suck no matter what age you are. I haven't told my mom. I'm terrified she will excommunicate me from my family. I'm the oldest and I have very young sibling at home who I'm pretty close to. I don't want to risk my relationship with them over an argument I will never win. She is deeply entrenched into the anti-vaxxers movement and believes every word. I tried to get myself vaccinated in high school and she acted like I was threatening to kill myself in front of her. She knew I was considering it when I had my own kid and sent me a million articles and Facebook posts proving it would hurt my baby. She threatened the light would go out of his eyes and that he would get allergies, learning disorders, SIDS, my biggest nightmare, etc. She thinks she won because I simply don't talk about anymore. If she says anything I keep my mouth shut. I haven't lied to her, but I also haven't told her that her perfect grandson gets his shots every few months. If I did tell her and by some miracle she still talked to me, anything and everything remotely wrong with my child would be because of vaccines. Has a tummy ache? Probably the vaccines. Has a rash? Probably the live chickenpox virus that I injected him with eating his brain. Has a mild allergy to almonds? Obviously those evil vaccines. Otherwise our relationship is good, but until my child is old enough to tell his grandma herself she will not know. Hopefully by then she will be the one not willing to risk her relationship with her grandchild over her fear of the evil government mandated poison. But let me tell you, the brainwashing is real. Even after all of the research I did knowing it was the right thing to do, I cried my eyes out the night he got his first shot, terrified the worst would happen. My parents refused to have me vaccinated as a newborn all the way up until I was about 7. As a result, I had whooping cough, pertussis, as a baby and came very near to death. Parents, please vaccinate your kids. My mom is anti-vaccination but didn't become that way until I was older, so I got all the ones I needed as a baby but not the boosters in elementary high school, but I also haven't bothered to get them as an adult. My sister vaccinated her kids but not until they were older, school age, and I think her waiting had a lot to do with my mom and her overly negative view on them. When she finally did it, I remember my mom saying things like, well, if she's gonna do it at least they are older, more mentally developed. My mom is genuinely a good person and she doesn't go posting about it on Facebook or get in people's faces about it, but her and my other sister definitely are on the anti-vax train. My mother is just plain crazy when it comes to medical topics. and thinks that hospitals and doctors only want your money. So I was never vaccinated. For a little insight into the craziness, when I was 14, I was a breath away from dying from a burst appendix. My mother refused to take me to the hospital despite the pain. It was only when I started urinating blood that my father said he was taking me to the hospital. I waddled and out of consciousness while he carried me to the car. My mom physically fought him as he carried me. I was med-evaced to a larger hospital and had emergency surgery. The doctor told me in recovery that the infection was spreading to other organs, and my body was starting to shut down. If it had been a couple hours or more, it would have been too late. Fast forward 4 years later when I joined the army. The gauntlet of shots I received to get all the vaccinations was something else. I literally walked almost naked down a row with multiple medical staff on each side poking me with needles everywhere as I was told to keep walking forward and not stop. I am 35 now and feel just as healthy now as I did as a kid. Never had any other issues except for a hernia from strenuous exercise. Vaccinations do more good than harm. Out of 4 children, me being the youngest, I was never vaccinated. My mother's reasons for not letting me get my shots? Religious. She is a fucking Christian and all my brothers and sisters got their shots. I think she secretly wanted me dead tbh. When I was little I had an autoimmune disease, so I had to get the vaccine for chickenpox. My mom refused to get anything else since my disease was drug-induced. I was allergic to something they gave me. She's anti-vax. But I've had my child vaccinated. Partly because it's the law where I live. I just chose to spread out the dosages so she only got 1 to 2 vaccines at a time. And only if she wasn't already fighting something. It worked for us, and allowed me to track her actions to the vaccines closer than if I hadn't. My mom was incredibly understanding throughout the whole process. This is the need. Herd immunity. Wikipedia webpage. You'll have to get vaccinated if you plan on having kids. Babies who are too young to have vaccinations rely on the herd immunity. Please don't be around any young babies until you get yourself vaccinated.